I'll turn it over to Christine.
Okay, I really only have just a few words. Liz and I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for taking time out of their Saturday to join us. And especially thank you to everybody at Inozyme, because we know how hard you guys have been working to bring this clinical trial to fruition. And we're grateful to all of you for taking the time to go over it today and to answer any questions that our community has. With that being said, I'm happy to turn it over to Catherine so she can lead on.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to share some slides here with everyone. All right. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, wonderful. Yes. So thank you for joining us today. We are joined by some folks from the Inozyme team, and I wanted to introduce everyone before we get started. So we're joined by Doug Trecco, our Chief Executive Officer, Kurt Gunter, our Chief Medical Officer, Matt Winton, our Chief Operating Officer, myself, Leontia Burke, VP of Clinical Operations. And so one quick disclaimer before we get started, INZ-701 is an investigational product, and it has not been determined to be safe or effective by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration or any other health regulatory authorities. So during this webinar, no individual patient situations will be discussed. All healthcare discussions and decisions should be carried out with your child's healthcare provider. Inozyme is sharing information that has been approved by an institutional review board regarding the anticipated ENERGY-3 pivotal clinical trial in pediatrics with ENPP1 deficiency and is making no recommendations on your child's healthcare. This session will be recorded and all lines are muted, and questions can be submitted via the chat function at the bottom of your screen, or you can share those with Liz and Christine in your community chat, and they can share them with the group as well. For any questions not answered on the webinar today, we will send those responses out to the community after the webinar, and we will also be sharing the recording of the webinar with the community as well. So our agenda today, we want to go over the progress that we've made so far. We're going to give you the background on clinical trials in general. Then we're going to talk a little bit about INZ-701 and a lot about the ENERGY-3 study. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the travel and logistics that will be associated with the study. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Doug Trecco, our Chief Executive Officer. Doug.
Thanks, Catherine. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Doug Trecco, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Inozyme. I took over as CEO in April of this year, and while I'm relatively new to the company, I've spent nearly 35 years working with physicians and scientists developing drugs for rare diseases, and I understand the special needs of the patients and families who are affected by diseases for which there are no therapies or readily accessible diagnostic tests. I believe that ENPP1 deficiency may be effectively treated by enzyme replacement therapy, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about our progress and plans in developing our drug candidate, INZ-701, for the treatment of patients with ENPP1 deficiency. We're about to complete our first studies of INZ-701 in patients with ENPP1 deficiency, as well as patients with ABCC6 deficiency. These 48-week phase 1/2 studies in adults were designed to test the safety of the drug, as well as to collect initial data on how the drug behaves in patients, including how long it stays in the body and its ability to metabolize its natural substrate, which helps normalize pyrophosphate and adenosine in the body. We also perform measurements to explore whether calcification in tissues and skeletal system change and whether symptoms of the disease are improving with treatment. In February, we presented some early data from the ENPP1 study where we showed that INZ-701 rapidly increased and normalized levels of pyrophosphate, a key inhibitor of mineralization that we're seeking to increase in patients with ENPP1 deficiency. We are planning a more complete update of these studies next month. Moving on, we are very pleased to report that we've begun treating infants with ENPP1 deficiency on our ENERGY-1 study in the United States. And that's shown in the center top panel here. We hope to enroll up to 8 infants in this study, and we hope that some data will be available in the second half of next year. Following this, in the second quarter of next year, we plan to initiate a very similar study outside the US, where we expect to treat up to 12 infants. Our focus today is the ENERGY-3 study, our pivotal study in pediatric patients aged 1 to 12 years old, which we plan to begin in October. This is a major step forward in our development program, and you will hear all the details about this study today. While still in the planning stages, we also plan to study INZ-701 in adolescent and adult patients, and we hope to provide details on that study and its timing in a future update. In addition to the studies mentioned here, we are also conducting natural history studies. We're collecting detailed information on ENPP1 and ABCC6 deficiencies, which help us understand the disease symptoms and which symptoms are most important to measure in clinical trials. The patients who have joined these studies are not receiving treatment, and their only benefit is the knowledge that they are helping other patients with these diseases. We're extremely grateful to these individuals. To conclude, I want to thank you for your support and your previous or potential participation in one of our studies. As you'll hear today, clinical trials are essential for the proper testing of new drugs, and it is patients and families like yourselves that allow us to complete these studies and bring important therapies forward to the most patients possible. I'll now turn the presentation over to Kurt Gunter, our Chief Medical Officer.
Thank you very much, Doug. My name is Kurt Gunter. As Doug said, I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Inozyme, and I'm really happy to be here with you today to discuss our study and answer any questions that you have about it. How do clinical trials work? Regulatory authorities and clinical scientists over the years have come up with the following paradigm. And the idea is to start out initially in animals or even in the test tube and demonstrate that your drug is safe and active. Then move into what are called phase 1 clinical trials, which are generally done in adults, which is what we did, in small numbers of patients to evaluate the safety and determine appropriate dosing. After phase 1, clinical trials typically progress into what's called phase 2, where the first tests of effectiveness of a drug occur and additional safety is determined. Also, phase 2 is a good time to pilot and determine appropriate endpoints. By endpoints, we mean outcome measures for further studies. Now, what we've done at Inozyme is we've tried to take a little bit of a shortcut, and in the adult studies that Doug mentioned, we've combined phase 1 and phase 2 with the goal of getting this drug to the market to patients as soon as possible. Phase 3 studies, which are sometimes called pivotal studies, these are the most important studies for us because these generate the data we need to convince regulatory authorities and the data you all need to convince regulatory authorities that the drug is safe and effective. These are larger studies, and as you'll learn, or probably know already, these are often include a control group. And indeed, the ENERGY-3 study, which we'll be talking about today, is a phase 3 or pivotal study. Finally, there are phase 4 studies, which are done after a drug is approved to get more information, typically on the safety profile of the drug. Next slide, please. So how do we get a child or any potential participant enrolled in a clinical trial? Well, there's 4 different stages, as you can see here. I'll go through them. Pre-screening involves preliminary questions about whether your child may qualify. You may be asked to participate in a video or a phone call, and you may be asked to provide some personal information and previous medical history. Next comes the informed consent process. I think it's important to point out that informed consent is not just signing a form. It's a process that all aspects of the study are discussed with you, with the study doctor and the study staff. You have an opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. And this leads you to make an informed decision. We ask you to sign a consent form at the end. But once you sign that, you can still withdraw your consent at any time. After the informed consent process occurs, screening starts. Now, the study doctor and study team cannot perform any procedure or draw blood or do anything until we obtain informed consent. So that is called the screening. And the screening is important to determine whether your child is going to be eligible for the study. And finally, we get to the meat of the study, is the study participation. This is the time when study drug, or INZ-701, as we call our drug, or a control treatment is given to your child. And the child is evaluated periodically throughout the study. And typically in a clinical trial, a study participation involves a little more visits, more blood draws, more procedures typically than you would have to go through under the course of standard medical care. But of course, the reason we do that is to get the information we need to provide safety and efficacy data. Next slide, please. So I'd like to go over the drug and then the specifics of the clinical trial. So the name of our drug, it doesn't have a very fancy name yet. We use a code name. It's called INZ-701. If you look on the left part of the slide, you can see what the normal ENPP1 enzyme looks like. It's got those two kind of puffy ends. That's the business end of the enzyme. And then it's got these little tails that are shown embedded in the membrane of the cell. This is the enzyme that's missing in your children and all people with ENPP1 deficiency. This enzyme acts on a molecule called ATP to generate another molecule called pyrophosphate, or PPI. You all are probably experts on this, so maybe I'm telling you something you already know. But nevertheless, this is how we make our INZ-701. So we've synthesized using recombinant technology the parts of the enzyme that convert the ATP into PPI. And we've added what's called an FC fragment to it. So what this does is it makes the enzyme soluble in the body. So it's no longer bound to a membrane. And now it can go anywhere in the body to find ATP to generate as much ATP, to generate as much PPI as possible. And this is given by, as many of you probably know, by a subcutaneous injection. That subcutaneous means just under the skin. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's ENERGY-3 all about? So this is a pivotal, in other words, a phase 3 trial to test INZ-701. Sometimes we'll call that the study drug. And we are planning to test it in children from 1 to less than 13 years of age. Now, if you decide to enter the study, it will last at least 13 months, including the screening period that I mentioned. And the screening period is up to 52 days. It doesn't mean it has to be 52 days. It's up to 52 days. We wanted to allow as much time as reasonably possible for convenience for you to allow for travel. Then there's a 52-week treatment period. And then after that, all patients enter an extension period, and we will continue to provide drug to your children until the drug is on the market for all patients that's our commitment. We are also doing that, by the way, for our adult studies, and we intend to do that for every study. Now, this is a so-called open label study. You may have heard about blinded trials where people don't know what they're getting, and they might be getting a placebo and they might be getting an active drug. This study is not designed that way. So everyone will know what everyone's getting. Now, it is what's called a randomized study, meaning that when you enroll in the study, you can be assigned to get INZ-701, or your child could be assigned to stay on whatever conventional therapy they're on. And we do this to generate a control group so that we can better compare safety and efficacy. And this is what we've determined after talking to regulatory authorities is the fastest way to bring this drug to all patients. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So all clinical trials have inclusion and exclusion criteria. These tell us how we are going to select patients. Clinical trials have patient selection criteria, as they're sometimes known, to make sure that there's optimal safety in the study. So we don't want to enroll participants who may not be sufficiently healthy to participate. But we also have selection criteria to try to generate a patient group where we have the maximal chance of demonstrating efficacy. And this is to everyone's benefit. Now, there are more patient selection criteria than what are shown here. And in fact, when this study will be shortly posted on clinicaltrials.gov, the government website for all clinical trials, you'll be able to learn more about it. But the key ones are that the patients have to be between 1 and 13, and they have to have low PPI levels. You'll remember that INZ-701 is designed to increase PPI. There has to be a genetic diagnosis of ENPP1 deficiency. And importantly, there has to be evidence of skeletal abnormalities consistent with rickets on X-rays. And we are prohibiting certain medications, which we do not think will be a big burden for patients. So we do have some criteria that would mandate when a patient is not eligible. I'll spare you the pain of having to listen to me read all these, but basically they involve the investigator's opinion about whether the patient is well enough to participate. If you're not willing to discontinue your current medications, i.e. active vitamin D3 or phosphate supplements, or if there's surgery planned. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of the design of the study. We're excited to tell you we're planning to start treating patients in October. And we are going to be requiring patients, as I mentioned, to have certain eligibility criteria shown on the left. We're planning to recruit 33 patients into the study, and they will be randomized, as I mentioned. So when you sign up for the study, when you sign that informed consent form, you won't know which drug you're going to get. That will be determined at the randomization stage shown here. Then you will actually, because it's an open label study, you will know which drug you're getting, but you will not have a choice about which one you get. You'll be assigned to a drug based on randomization. Now, you will have a 67% chance of getting INZ-701. And then after 52 weeks on study, everyone will get INZ-701. So everyone will get INZ-701 eventually. The endpoints, which are sometimes known as outcome measures, are shown here. We're going to be measuring PPI levels, as well as other things. Our GACI score is a measure of rickets, as is RSS, that means rickets severity score. We'll also be measuring the children's growth And PK means pharmacokinetics. What that is measures of the level of the blood, level of INZ 701 in the blood. Next slide, please. So for safety, the first 5 doses, we're asking patients to come to the clinic and be treated by the clinic staff. And then your child will continue to receive the study drug in the clinic by the study doctor until the study doctor and you both agree that you can give the study drug yourself to your child at home. And then the study doctor will provide training to help you all figure out how to give the study drug. I'll just tell you this: in our study of adults, all patients except for one are now self-administering the drug by themselves at home. So it's been successfully done in our adult study. Next slide, please. So as within any clinical trial, there are potential risks in ENERGY-3, and that those will all be discussed with you during the informed consent process. It's probably true that there's more inconvenience than frank health risks, because you will have to give up time to travel to the study site for this trial. We have described some of the safety data from our earlier this year, and we'll be presenting more safety data next month. But so far, the INZ 701 has a very favorable safety profile. But during the informed consent process, the study doctor will go over all the side effects that have been observed with the drug. It's important to know that the study drug may not work. We cannot guarantee that it will work. And as I mentioned, you may be randomized to the control group, but eventually everyone will get INZ 701. And then you're committing to fairly lengthy visits, especially during the first week. There's a number of procedures and blood tests that we want to do. But keep in mind that by participating in this clinical trial, there may be a benefit from the drug. We can't guarantee that. But even more important than that probably is that you have an opportunity to contribute knowledge that could potentially result in bringing a therapy to all INZ 701 patients. So for all of you who are even thinking about participating in our study, we thank you, and I think all the patients will thank you. Next slide, please. This just gives you an idea of what the study calendar will look like. On the left, shown the different procedures. I just will mention a couple of them. We will conduct a medical history. We'll do a physical examination. We'll collect blood and urine. There'll be an ECG performed. There are going to be x-rays of the hands and wrists, and also in the lower extremities, the knee area. And that'll be done at screening, point time of screening, at week 26 and at the end of the study. There'll be questionnaires and a hearing test as well. And this is for patients on INZ 701. Now, this slide shows what you would receive if you're in the control group. And I'll just remind you, the control group, you'll simply stay on whatever treatments you are currently giving to your child for ENPP1 deficiency. And we think from what we've learned, mostly that could be oral phosphate supplements and active vitamin D. But the study plan for the control group is highly similar for the ones getting INZ 701, except, of course, these patients will not get any INZ 701 until they get to week 52. And so I think that concludes all my planned remarks about the study. I want to thank GACI Global because GACI Global had a lot of input on the design of ENERGY-3. And I want to thank all the patients and you all, because without your participation, we won't learn what we really want to learn from this study. And I'm sure you have questions. I look forward to addressing those. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Catherine, who will discuss some of the travel and logistical questions.
Thank you, Kurt. So as Kurt mentioned, there will be some travel required for you and your family during the study. And so that requirement, we want to make sure that we support families through that process. So Inozyme will be covering the costs of the following expenses during the study for study participant and up to 2 caregivers. So travel to and from the study site, accommodations for visits requiring any overnight stays, and then food and reasonable living expenses. The duration of your stay will depend on your family's circumstances. The study doctor will discuss with you what is and what is not covered so that you can make an informed decision. So where will the study be taking place? We're planning to open sites for this study in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Turkey and United Arab Emirates, in France, in Spain, and in Canada. So the study will definitely be a global study, and there will be sites, spread out all over the world. And now I'm going to open it up for any questions that may have come in.
Thank you, Catherine. So